Good evening, church. Well, what a wonderful evening, isn't it? Certainly good to be here, good to be with you. And those of you in the viewing audience, we hope you take Bible, pen and paper in hand, maybe jot down some of these scriptures. I'd like to ask a question. We've been asking some interrogative questions lately. What about infanticide? And this is something that is probably going to be enacted in several states, not all states, but several states. We're used to the term abortion. And what does the Bible have to say about such a practice? Well, before we get to the scripture, let's cover some ground about some facts. I'm going to state some facts from the American magazine. I did not know that when it comes to abortions in the state of New York, that out of 3 births, on an average, 1 ends up in abortion. So this may or may not, more than likely, will cause more deaths to children. But yet, it's called the Reproductive Health Act. You know, it's interesting when you study a little bit about some acts, whether it's state or federal, quite possibly county, that a lot of them are opposite from what they portray themselves as. You know, like the Affordable Care Act. We're all familiar with that. Some call it Obamacare. Very, very expensive. It's not affordable. When it comes to Reproductive Health Act of New York, certainly not healthy for the child, because the child is always murdered. And I don't use that term lightly or to be a provocateur. When we understand that children in the womb are innocent, taking that life. Now, there's a difference if, say, the child is going to be a danger to the mother, in many cases, both will die. When the child is removed, that's different from being inconvenienced, having a child, and then removing it. I'm going to discuss a few things as well. A lot of times, and I've been on the radio and a couple times on television, we get on these subjects. A lot of times people say, well, and let's answer a few things right off the bat. Some would say, well, you're a man and you really don't have a say in this matter. Well, when we talk about abortion, and those that claim to be pro-choice, pro-abortion, they're always pro-kill the baby. And people, whether it's a man or woman, someone like myself, that would publicly state that abortion is wrong, well, you're a man, and you don't have a say in it. You're not able to bring a child to term. And until you can do that, well, you actually have no input. Well, there's some problems with that. You know, as we think of it, when people say pro-choice or pro-abortion, right, they're actually anti-woman. Because when we look at the statistics of a child being born, and fellas, unfortunately, we're outnumbered in this world. There are going to be more girls, more females than males. And what do? They tear these children out of their mother's womb. They're dead. They kill them. So what are they doing? They are actually anti-woman, because they're trying to destroy millions upon millions of babies that would be girls that would turn into women, that would have mature into women. So that doesn't fit. Some would say, well, you know, you're a man, and you shouldn't talk about women's rights. Well, we understand that a woman has a right over her own body, but the child is not her body. It is a separate, and as we're going to make an argument, viable being, person. And this is important. And then some would say, well, you don't really have a right to discuss this because this is the law of the land. What right? For the most part, not always, but for the most part, people are promiscuous. People are immoral. And what right does someone have to change the laws of the land and to tax any one of us, including myself, and not say I don't have or you don't have a say in the matter? No, a lot of times we're going to hear answers about this matter of taking the life of the innocent, and they're going to quote, medical experts, and they're going to quote this expert, and they say the man has nothing to do with it. Oh my. Some of these people, I'm going to use the word delusional. Some people go so far to this that I think we're going to have biology classes and go over some lessons with the birds and the bees. Because when a woman has a child, somehow, some way, a man is involved. So when we deal with certain matters, it becomes an emotional matter, and people that are for this position become very emotional. They talk over people. They want to have it their way. So let's examine together, and those of you in the viewing audience, we're not trying to be controversial, but what about human life in these United States? Shouldn't innocent life always be protected? And when we talk about children, infants, pray tell, what are they going to be? We could become and study political scientists, other kinds of disciplines in critical thought. And when it's all said and done, a child in the womb is still a child. It's a human being. Now, some would say, but Brother Friel, they're not a person. And that's really the argument. How you define a person? Roe v. Wade. Well, when he takes his first breath, well, that doesn't answer what a person is. And is there a connection in the womb? And of course, when we deal with Scripture and science, and I suggest there is. So let's look at a couple things about what was going on. Do we realize that abortion was unfettered in this state and for the most part, most states, until the 24th week or the end of the second trimester? Now, the RHA, as it's called, now life can be taken in the third and last trimester, and very, very close up to birth. And in some ways, there are those that are kind of strategizing, that believe in this kind of infanticide. And by the way, I'm going to make an argument that it is not founded upon science. It is not founded upon logic. That it's really founded upon a geopolitical kind of thinking, and that the idea and the concept that it is not a child is so far removed from reality. I mean, what is it? Is it a wart? Is it a wisdom tooth that's just gone to seed, so to speak? No, it's a human being. And in the law, some of the verbiage in the law that redefines what a person is, and to do so at this time, if a woman that was carrying a child, and let's say it was the 22nd week or 23rd week, in the criminal code of New York State, that if that child, let's say a drunk driver, let's say somebody murders that mother and that child dies, they would have been able to not only prosecute and adjudicate that case, but now they cannot, because this redefines what a person is under this law. Also, in the verbiage, the idea is of a reasonable, good faith, professional judgment. So a woman, a young girl, could have this child aborted if the health professional, I didn't say doctor. You used to have medical doctors, but now in the verbiage of the law, it allows not only for an MD or doctor, but also a nurse practitioner or medical assistant to perform this operation to remove and snuff out the life of a child so close to birth? Well, we know that in the state legislature of Virginia that this is being discussed, their House, their Senate. Others will take suit. But this became law. And of course, Governor Cuomo, the Democratic governor of New York, signed this into law. Well, not only is this a matter of discussion for the state of New York, but also the country at large. Because under our Constitution, there are 3 inalienable rights described. One of them, or the first one mentioned, is life itself. What about the rights of the life of an unborn child? Don't they have rights? Aren't they a person? No, they don't breathe, but they in birth they do. God had provided that until they're born. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Isn't it in I believe it's the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, the verbiage of how life is so important, and yes, a murderer or somebody committing a capital offense must go through or have the right and access to due process of law, but that their life and their property cannot be taken from them without that. And life is an important aspect of our great nation and liberty. Well, as we ponder such matters, then can a person that is against, or they see this as an evil, are they themselves the problem? And therefore, a person could conclude, a reasonable person could conclude that not only do they not have a right to oppose this, but that they themselves would have no standing in a court of law or with science. Well, no. Let's notice a few things in Scripture. Memory serves me correctly? In the book of Isaiah, we're going to look at 2, maybe 3 references to Scripture. There are many, and we could take time with that. But we want to encapsulate, really, what's going on here. It's an interesting phrase in Isaiah chapter 44 and verse 2, being formed in the womb. You realize that the argument that people make, and no doubt, there are some married couples, very small percentile. Their child, they can tell now with science, the child might have Down syndrome, or they might have some kind or type of birth defect. And the argument is that they will make the decision. That's a decision for God. It's not for you and I. It's not for children, or say rather the parents of the child. And they would say, well, we'll do this because, that child could be a burden on society, this and that. The vast majority of abortions, yes, a lot of times the girl, and it takes 2 to tango, and it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate fact of life and of science, is that the girl or the young woman bears the child. And they would say, well, I want to make something of my life, and therefore, if the child is aborted, I'm just basically kind of getting away from the consequences of my action, and my life will be better. But we want you, the taxpayer, to pay for that, and not talk about and not be against it, and bring up some of these arguments that you have about morality and about what is right and what is wrong. So that is a problem, and that's a problem in our culture today, that we're going to err on that side. And I know some would say, and it is terrible when a woman is raped. You know, 50, 70 years ago, and a little bit beyond that, a rapist would be executed. And too often we speak about these scenarios, hardship scenarios, should really talk more about how to abort the rapist and bring the rapist to justice. Very important. But the vast, vast majority of girls or young women basically are unwed. And this is a reason that we have abortions. Well, what does Scripture and science teach? Well, in Isaiah chapter 44, verse 2, God said, through the inspired pen of Isaiah, that people were formed in the womb. And doctors, obstetricians, and others, scientists, men and women who study this discipline, it's marvelous when we talk about life. And life, by the way, from a biblical standpoint, begins at conception. Begins at conception. And it is a life. It is something that is God-given. Also, we find in Scripture, a little bit different. If we go to Genesis chapter 2, we have the formulation. God formed Adam from the dust, right? And he breathed into his nostrils, and Adam became a living soul. A little bit different with Eve, because Eve was formed from what? The rib of Adam. And the DNA, and when we talk about the human genome and the XY chromosome, there's male and there's female. Genesis chapter 1, God made them male and female. Now I mention this and I use this term quite often, maybe, and I think it's correctly put or applied, but it's very deceptional when we speak about people today that say how they identify. We get to this matter of the person. They'll say, yes, in the Constitution it says that a person has a life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but a child's not breathing. It's not a full person. It's not well, if that's the case, when are any of us a full person? Are we a full person when we're 21? Are we a full person when we're 61? Are we a full person when we're 101 or somewhere in between? It doesn't answer that question, but the Scripture and science does. Life begins at conception. We are formed in the womb. As a matter of fact, in Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 through 5, here's some snippets here. Before I formed you, who's speaking there? God. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you and appointed you as a prophet. My. The creator of heaven and earth has the power not only to begin life, form life, look into the future, go back into the future. And what are we talking about here? Are we talking about that this is some kind of abscess? Something that maybe a hair follicle and maybe a piece of bone or tooth? No. It's talking about a person. Viable, meaning logical. A child is a viable person. These laws that men bring up and try to enact to eradicate innocent life, what do? They try to define the term person. Well, it's not a person unless it takes its first breath of life on its own. No. That is a person inside the mother's womb. You know, it's interesting, and I say delusional, and this is a part because science and Scripture go hand in hand. We got these folks out here that can't figure if they're male or female. Again, do we need to go back and have some classes on the birds and the bees? No. People want to identify. That is a word, a power word for them. They want to identify in their person. whether they're male, female, or 96 other genders, right? Very strange. So the Bible is very explicit about He made them male and female. What has been known the last 30 years about the human genome? They can tell if a kidney comes out of a body and a donor needs it. They have a pretty good idea of whether or not it'll be rejected. And they can tell whether it comes from a man or a woman, a male or a female. Isn't that something? And there's no third party, so to speak. So yes, the Bible and Scripture actually coincide together with the statements of Scripture and of the Bible. So when we get on the subject, well, what about infanticide? Just because the government, the state government or the federal government says that abortion is legal, that that's all right? I don't think so. And that even though, as a man who cannot bear children, but there are also other aspects. I think like a father, and as a taxpayer, and other venues in life. This touches everyone. This isn't just a woman's issue. Do women have a right over their own body? Absolutely. But can that body go and commit crimes? Whether it's male or female? No. It's not ethical. Our ethos is different when it comes to that kind of behavior. So when we look at this, does it do any good to redefine what a person is? And to say, well, a baby, an infant, really isn't a person, and can basically take their life minutes before they're born. And we're going to see, and it's going to be pressed even after this. And some of this has to do with the stacking, so to speak, of the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court. And I think some might be seeing that there'll be a case brought, and that will be overturned. Remember, Roe v. Wade was 5-4. And we might have one more conservative, or hopefully a conservative justice, might overturn that 6-3. We don't know that. But they're seeing that, and they're trying to double down. Now, what kind of people, what kind of ethos, what kind of ethical directive takes the life of the innocent and calls it something different? That's sick. That is sick. That's not academic. That's just sick. This is something that is so ghoulish that quite possibly Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime, or that of Stalin, might have thought, well, we won't do that because of the reaction of the world. Someday they might be up on charges somewhere, or maybe even hung for this kind of depravity. The innocent are to be protected, and children are innocent. So I think we could make quite a case. What about infanticide? That's the killing of children. Is that something that is righteous just because the government says they can do it or allows people to do it? I don't think so. Life, innocent life, and human life. See, we're getting into this idea and concept sometimes that, a dog, a rabbit, right? A giraffe, a whale, we're all the same. Our molecular packaging's a little different, but we're all the same. We're all life beings. No, we're not the same. There's a difference between humankind and animal kind and plant kind. We got some folks out there running around saying that we're not. And we got some folks running around there saying that, well, we really don't know if we're men or women. Is the problem with the body or the problem with the mind? Well, I'm going to suggest to you the problem's with the mind. And some folks, well, I hate to say it, and it might sound simplistic. Some folks They don't have their head right. A child is a human being, not a puppy, but a human being. And as we ponder such matters, these are the kinds of things that will define us as a society. And God, when we think of the 70 some odd million since 1973 who have been torn up, and what was some of the arguments that the pro-death, the anti-women movement, I'm talking about, now and other organizations, that abortion would be sporadic, wouldn't happen very often. Well, I'll tell you what, they need to get a memo from New York that if out of 3 births, one of them is going to be aborted. I don't know about you, but 33 or a third of births today. Are we having a problem today with people that are getting older and we don't have very much of a workforce? Or they're making that claim? Well, some of that, not all of that, and having illegal immigration, some of that is touching upon this practice of abortion or infanticide, because 70 million people that would be alive today, they would be working, or a percentage of them. Very important. I realize it could be a complicated subject. I don't think it is. Either when a woman carries a child in ingestion, and it's either a person or it is not, that if it is a person, that it is innocent, even though, as we talk about sin of the father, the mother, what have you, that's still an innocent person, and it needs to be protected. Very, very important. Hope those of you in the viewing audience take time. We're going to open now to the floor for questions, comments, and observations.